Hey everybody, it's Shannon and Elise here.
Hey.
Ready for this next message to really the third out of the fourth for the marriage series that we're going to wrap up. And we're going to be in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. And Paul, really interesting here, he answers a question that the church wrote to him regarding marriage and intimacy.
Cool. Let's do it.
Yeah. So, I think that's kind of one of the things people try to stray away from, is talking about kind of awkward things in the Bible when it talks about marriage and intimacy. But I think it's a very important aspect, right? When you say so.
Wait.
So yeah, Paul is addressing this, and I think it's a good place for us to look at and just kind of bring out some, I just think some really good ways to deepen intimacy in marriage.
Is that why it's more of a podcast today?
Yes, because we don't want you guys to see us during this time. No.
It's awkward enough,
yeah.
Right?
No, I just think, we always like to do things different. And I know myself, like when I'm driving on the road or I'm listening to a podcast, I'm not watching it and listening. I mean,
you better not be.
Right? I mean, almost, even when I'm not and I'm just at home or whatever and listening to a podcast, I mean, all I'm doing is listening to it. And so I think this is just a kind of another avenue that we can give, because I'm sure there's not a lot of people out there don't want to just constantly stare at my braces with zeros off, All right, so let's get to this. And so what I'm going to do is read a few verses, and then we'll get in here and talking about it. All right?
Cool.
Yeah. All right, so 1 Corinthians chapter 7, Paul says, "Now concerning the matters about which you wrote," and here's the matter, "it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman, for immorality. Each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Do not deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement, for a limited time, that you may devote yourselves to prayer and fasting, but then come together again, so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control." And so that's out of the ESV. And so I want to just take a quick moment and just read out of the Message so you can really kind of get an understanding of this, because sometimes during the translation it can seem a little choppy. And so I just wanted to read it out of the Message here real quick. Again, chapter 7, verse 1. "Now, getting down to the questions you asked in your letter to me. First, is it a good thing to have sexual relations? Certainly, but only within a certain context. It's good for a man to have a wife, and for a woman to have a husband. Sexual drives are strong, but marriage is strong enough to contain them and provide for a balanced and fulfilling sexual life in a world of sexual disorder. The marriage bed must be a place of mutuality, the husband seeking to satisfy his wife, the wife seeking to satisfy her husband. Marriage is not a place to stand up for your rights. Marriage is a decision to serve the other, whether in bed or not. Abstaining from sex is permissible for a period of time if you both agree to it, and if it's for the purposes of prayer and fasting, but only for such times. Then come back together again. Satan has ingenious ways of tempting us when we least expect it." And so there's another kind of teases it out, I think, a little bit better. I know you like the Message. At least you read that quite often.
Yeah.
Or you read it, I guess, most every time.
Yeah, nowadays.
Yeah, and actually, for this past week, I've been reading through Psalms, and today I got to the 60th Psalm, and I've been reading through the Message on that. It's been really, really cool.
Yeah, I was in New King James Version for quite a while, years, and then switched over to ESV and enjoyed that comparison. And now I've just been in the Message for quite a while. And so it's neat when you start comparing multiple versions, and it helps that light bulb go off for me. Yeah. I have a lot of aha moments now.
Yeah, and for those who aren't really familiar with the Bible, the New King James Version is the one that she said, but ESV just simply means English Standard Version. And these are really good quality versions, of course, of the Bible being translated into our language. But the Message really does a way of kind of just bringing it modern. And in some sense, I wouldn't. There are some really loose translations there within it, but it's really good to help understand where you're coming from, especially in a passage like this. Because
I need you to cut it to me straight.
Yeah.
There's no sugarcoating it. Shannon, he gets to show off and do all the Greek and Hebrew and translating all that, and I'm just like, give me the easy to read version, man.
Yeah, well, I like the easy reading too. So, all right. So here, what I wanted to talk about is just kind of 3 ways to deepen our marriage and intimacy, and you really can get it out of the scriptures here. And I love the context because this is the church asking Paul, and so this isn't the world saying, "Hey, how do we define this, or what should this be?" This is the church actually asking the question, and the one of the apostles of Jesus is telling us this, and so it's really really cool and really weighty. So I think that one of the things I want to point out is he says it's good for a man to have a wife and for a woman to have a husband, and this is he goes on to say this is why sexual drives are strong, but marriage is strong enough to contain them and provide for a balanced and fulfilling marriage. And so the first kind of way I think is we can deepen our marriage, specifically in intimacy, is talk about your desires, right? Just talk about your desires. Now, whatever that looks like for you, I mean, it doesn't just desires, and I don't want this to just be like stuck within just the confines of sexual relations, but it is good to talk about your desires across the board, but also in the context of kind of this, the need and the desires in our marriage with intimacy. But yeah, you want to talk about your desires. What do you think is really awesome about being able to do that?
Just like last time, we were talking about communication being the key, and that's just another, avenue that's super important. And I think that we're always learning and growing together, and sometimes we don't necessarily change, but like we grow into maybe other things that we like or want to explore, and so if we're not talking to each other about these things, we're going to miss it. And when you start getting on different pages, frustrations can rise. And so it's just better just to be open with each other as much as possible, and it be a safe space to not feel like you're going to feel embarrassed or uncomfortable. It
Yeah.
should be enjoyable.
I would say, though, that we've been married for almost 19 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so where we're at now, when we say talking about your desires and stuff, is not at all where we were in the first 5 years, right?
Right.
So if you're not married or you're engaged and be married or you're just been married for a few years, this can be a very kind of awkward and very kind of difficult thing to do.
Yeah.
And I do sense, or I not sense, but I do want the listeners to know that as you're married longer together, it becomes easier and easier to talk about these because you grow and closer together.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think it's extremely important, even in the very beginning stages, to wherever you're comfortable about, to talk about your desires, because God designed marriage not just for procreation. He designed it right so that man and woman would be happy and that they would be able to express their feelings with each other. And I think the ability to know each other like that just takes the marriage to another level.
Mm-hmm. And the fact that it's designed so that that's the one thing that no one else should be able to do for your spouse, your significant other.
Then your spouse can meet those desires, so there's not this want to go out somewhere else or whatever. Is that
Correct.
What you're saying? Okay, all right. Because I want to make sure the listeners know what you're talking about there. But yeah, so talk about your desires. I mean, that's what Paul says here. He says, listen, sexual drives are strong, but marriage is strong enough to contain them and provide for a balanced and fulfilling sexual life. He says, in a world of sexual disorder. And so, anything outside of a marriage, when we're trying to discuss, we shouldn't be getting our ideas from that. We should be, hey, we're comfortable with each other. Here's what we want to talk about. And I do think once you break through that awkward wall, it's a really beautiful thing that can take place. And but it does say the marriage bed must be a place of mutuality. The husband seeking to satisfy his wife, and the wife seeking to satisfy her husband. And that's what I'm talking about. We can only satisfy each other. And again, not always just in sexual relations, but we can't satisfy each other if we don't know what each other really desires.
Right.
So, number one, talk about your desires. I think that's super powerful. Number two, take them seriously. In other words, the desires that you've talked about, and that listen, it's hard. It's been a very difficult time for, maybe you or your spouse or whoever it is to get to that place to talk about that, and to not take them seriously then at that point, I think is a very very selfish, but also a very I think it expresses again that they don't matter, because I think really trying to understand where each other's coming from is important. And I even struggle with that sometimes, because as a dude and then as a woman, there's just different ways that you think of things, and so my kind of like man radar goes up and says, okay, I'm thinking it this way when it should be another.
Your man radar goes up.
You like that?
No pun intended.
Oh, I don't know if that's going to make it that funny. I wasn't even there. That's funny you went to that place.
Sorry, I was there.
No, your desires at.
Hey.
Anyway, so take them seriously. You want to make sure that you're giving the other person, serious attention to what their desires are.
Well, and if they're not, it's like, man, like you were saying, you work up to that point to be like honest, and you're just exposing, you're like vulnerable at that time.
Oh, big
you know
time.
What I mean?
Yeah.
And if you get shut down or made fun of or, fill in the blank,
it's a hard way to come back from that.
See if you're ever going to want to share anything again.
Yeah.
So,
and it can be demoralizing when each other should be lifting each other up. But because in the end, it is a beautiful thing. So, number one, talk about your desires. Number two, take them seriously. And the last one I think is really important, is trust each other. To take them seriously, and that they're going to understand how important the context of marriage is. And within that context of marriage, that trust knows that it's not going outside of that. This is really important, and no one will miss this. Maybe you've, the listeners here, maybe you've come from a background of, unfortunately, some abuse, or maybe you've been neglected by your father or your mother or something, and then when you're married and there's this intimacy taking place, it's hard for that person to trust that other person. Sure. And so when you share your desires or you share the things in marriage that is intimate, you're trusting that other person. Not only are they keeping it within the confines of marriage and keeping it the conversation between each other, but whatever those desires are that are being said, that they're trusting that you're not going to go beyond that either. Yeah. Like, I think there's this communication that takes place, whatever that looks like, and to respect each other's boundaries within that. And I think there's beautiful freedom in marriage, but there are going to, there are going to be boundaries on each side. And I think once those are communicated and set, then that trust, knowing that they're not going to go past that or anything like that, is really powerful too.
Oh yeah, always have a safe word.
Yeah, like this is what I mean. This is right from the scripture. Here he says the marriage bed must be a place of mutuality. In other words, I trust what you're saying, and the other spouse is trusting what they're saying. So this is a place of mutuality, agreement. The husband seeking to satisfy his wife, the wife seeking to satisfy her husband. Marriage is not a place to stand up for your rights. And what he's saying there is marriage isn't a place for me to stand up and go, hey, listen, it's about me, 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 me. Marriage is a decision to serve the other, whether in bed or not. So he said, outside of that, whatever. But he goes on to say, abstaining from sex is permissible for a period of time. I think it's interesting, he says, with prayer and fasting. I think it's really cool that there's times where maybe you plan to kind of be separate from each other for a while to kind of build that desire and that excitement back up, because, kids and work and family and all that can get in the way sometimes. And I think we lose sometimes this idea of intimacy within our marriage. And I think it's a critical component.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when the sleep deprivation kicks in, there's those seasons where, man, a nap just sounds so much better. Yeah, but take the nap afterwards. Right. Be even better. So anyway, so 3 ways to deepen your marriage intimacy. 1, talk about your desires.
2, take them seriously. 3, trust each other. Yeah, sound good? All right, cool. Love you guys. Talk to you soon.
Bye.